Over the past couple of years, Ayaneo's been the main handheld manufacturer, continuously putting effort into dual-screen designs. With their two FlipDS handhelds, they've offered surprisingly good dual-screen Windows experiences backed by the performance of modern chipsets. In the past, I've described them as the best dual-screen handhelds money can buy, for folks where money isn't an issue. Ayaneo's third dual-screen handheld, the Pocket DS, attempts to live up to that status while transitioning from Windows to Android for less than half the price. And up front, it's a very solid attempt. The Pocket DS is the most comfortable and competent Android dual-screen handheld thus far. In many ways, I prefer it to my FlipDS and would love to recommend it to anyone even passively interested in dual-screen handhelds. Except, well, there are a few key flaws that might make some folks want to wait for a version 2. Before we get into any of that, let's talk about hardware. Taking its design directly from the Flip 1S DS, the Pocket DS reminds me more of a handheld PC than one of the other, much cheaper, Android handhelds on the market. Among Android clamshells, there's really no good comparison point here. The smooth metal lid immediately feels premium to the touch. Meanwhile, the large, soft rubber grips around back feel thoughtfully implemented. They won't quite offer the same level of comfort as a much larger handheld or non-clamshell handheld, and I'd always appreciate just a bit rounder grip in the first place. However, what's here feels just deep and contoured enough that, when combined with the device's overall width, I've had no issues playing games for hours on end comfortably. That's aided by some soft, round corners on the control deck itself. On some other clamshells, sharp corners have made for some uncomfortable play sessions. The Pocket DS's edges refuse to dig in even slightly. Ayaneo's clearly learned some lessons since the first Flip DS. The overall size stays the same as their Flip line. That's about double the size of a new 3DS XL, with a bit extra heft. Its footprint's not too far removed from other non-compact handhelds these days, but it is on the larger side for a clamshell. It does fit into full-size jeans and jacket pockets, although it's not going to be quite as inconspicuous as other smaller clamshells. Tossing it into a bag has typically been my preference. Still, if you're someone who really needs a handheld to be pocketable, it should be good enough, unless you're someone with really small pockets. Opening the handheld feels really smooth. I'm not the biggest fan of Ayaneo's hinge design, for reasons I'll get into later, but there's enough tension to the mechanism to make it easy to set the display at any angle. It's much closer to the feel of a laptop hinge than something like a Miu Flip. On either side of the hinge are two large, great-looking displays. The top display is a 7-inch 16:9 1920 by 1080 OLED display, and on the bottom we have a 5-inch 4:3 1024 by 768 LCD display. Now, many folks have cried foul at the bottom display not being OLED. However, I'm not quite sure I'd prefer an OLED display for a screen I'll mostly use to display static information from games or menus. Plus, I'd happily give up the fancier tech to have a proper 4:3 display this large. Its height is almost the same size as the top display, which makes for much better looking 3DS emulation than found on some of the other handhelds out right now. Its one weakness, and one of the largest reasons to potentially think twice about buying this handheld, is light bleed. Before shipping, Ayaneo themselves acknowledged it as a manufacturing flaw that folks should expect if they buy the handheld. That could change in the future, but I only have my pre-ordered handheld to rely on, and mine very clearly has light bleed. It hasn't impacted gameplay much, to be honest. The light bleed's only visible when staring at an almost black image, typically straight on while indoors. Given that most gameplay or apps are rarely fully black, I often forget it's even a problem. Your mileage may vary though. I'd also highly recommend requesting a refund if you bought a Pocket DS and found it too distracting. It's just not quite something that's been an issue for me on this specific unit with my specific tastes. Moving on to controls, they're very much a design you'll either love or hate. For the action buttons and D-pad, Ayaneo went with extremely low-profile membrane buttons. Despite their low profile, they do have a reasonable amount of travel to them with some light tactile feel. The design works great for the action buttons. Presses feel purposeful and responsive. They're not my favorite, but also nothing I've had a problem with. The D-pad's a bit of a different story. It's not terrible, and hasn't felt like a drag on gameplay at all. In fact, I've usually enjoyed using it. It just doesn't quite feel up to par with D-pads from some other manufacturers these days. Luckily, the sticks managed to surprise me a bit with their quality. They're half-height TMR sticks sunken into the shell. On the original Flip DS, Ayaneo's sunken sticks wound up feeling like a pain after a few months. But here, Ayaneo's widened the sticks well slightly, shaved away all but a concave stick cap, and added a bit of texture. It all adds up to a surprisingly comfortable experience that I've actually enjoyed using. Now, obviously, they won't be winning any awards compared to full-size sticks on non-clamshell handhelds. However, whether for movement or aiming, they've been solid. Up top, we have more standard shoulders and triggers. The shoulders are thin, but raised slightly above the triggers to make them easier to hit by touch. They're appropriately clicky and responsive. I like them. My only gripe is that Ayaneo's hinge design causes the display to rest against my fingers when using the shoulders. I had the same problem on my Flip DS and would like to see Ayaneo design a better solution for future devices. Points lost with the hinge are made up by the triggers though. They've a bit of flair to them, feel smooth to the pull, and angle in diagonally. Due to their angle, it's easy to squeeze both triggers with my hands placed at an angle. That makes it easier for me to adjust my grip as I find comfortable in the moment, instead of forcing me into a single optimal placement. It's very much appreciated, and helps stave off some of the awkwardness of the vertically aligned controls common with clamshells. Rounding out the inputs are various remappable buttons. There are 2 up top next to the shoulders and 3 just below the screen across from the combined fingerprint sensor power button. The top buttons have a default mapping as a back button and to activate the top display's task manager. They've been incredibly useful for allowing me quick navigation without taking my fingers off controls. Buttons down below swap dual screen focus, trigger the bottom display's task manager, and swap between power profiles by default. They've been less useful to me, but like the top buttons, can be easily ignored or remapped in settings to an extensive list of other options. I'm always a fan of having more choice for input, and Ayaneo's definitely allowed that. All those comfortable controls also add up to a comfortable gameplay experience. The Snapdragon G3X Gen 2 and 16GB of RAM in my unit allow it to comfortably hit the current edges of Android gaming without slowing down. For dual-screen gameplay, it's hard to think of another Android handheld that looks and feels as good to use as the Pocket DS. Both displays have almost the same physical height, meaning that both DS and 3DS displays have almost the right proportions out of the box. If they'd made the bottom display just a hair larger, it would have been perfect. As it stands now, DS games spanning gameplay across both displays still do need a little finessing to look perfect. Still, gameplay is immediately comfortable. There's about the right amount of space between the displays to account for the original hardware's hinge size. Book-style DS games have also worked much better than expected for such a large handheld. Having such large displays to support gameplay feels comfortable in a way that I've only seen the Surface Duo line manage thus far. It's the best example yet of why other handheld manufacturers should include 4x3 bottom displays of similar size to their top display. Beyond the technical details of it all, I've had a great time playing 3DS games at a 3x upscale. I recently started a new Ultra Moon save file and am having a blast. The game's occasionally slowed from expected shader caching, but has otherwise felt hard to distinguish from performance on my new 3DS XL. Ayaneo's landed on a great design for both DS and 3DS gameplay, and I hope other manufacturers take note. Wii U games are also slightly better here than elsewhere on Android. CMU for Androids is still far from perfect and performance could use some work. However, the larger bottom screen makes for a much more comfortable gamepad than other recent handhelds that have included much smaller, square bottom displays. I played the first couple hours of Wind Waker HD and found it more than comfortable enough to continue playing. The gamepad display is large enough to read text without too much hassle and hit touch targets without much fiddling. This won't necessarily be the best possible experience for games that rely heavily on the gamepad for core gameplay. For that, a larger 16:9 bottom display would work better here. Yet, for any game in which the gamepad's not the entirety of gameplay, it'll still be perfectly fine. Of course, for games like Yoshi's Woolly World that don't use the gamepad, none of that will matter. Fortunately, single-screen gameplay is also surprisingly good on either of the Pocket DS's displays. 4x3 consoles like GameCube and PS2 feel great to play on the bottom screen at 3x upscale. On more than one occasion, I've found myself booting up Mario Kart Double Dash to race a few laps while GameHub games downloaded on the top screen. I've even turned off the top screen on a couple occasions just because the size of the bottom screen feels surprisingly comfortable for certain games. When I pre-ordered the Pocket DS, I didn't think this would be a use case I'd care about, but I'm pleasantly surprised. Android games, GameHub, and other 16:9 systems feel similarly great on the top display. Once more, the size makes for a really comfortable experience, backed by solid performance. I've had a great time playing Prince of Persia and some other random games from my Wii library. As with other similarly performant Android handhelds, most performance limits seem to come from software rather than hardware, especially for Steam games. GameHub makes many more demanding games a hassle to run at all, and some moderately demanding games that do work don't necessarily perform as well as they could due to optimization issues. Well, at least without a ton of fiddling. For now, lighter games like Grapple Dog and Hades 2 tend to work the best. Those lighter games easily run at or above 60 FPS and offer great gameplay with only occasional emulator-related jank. By turning off the bottom display, the top display can even be set to refresh at up to 165 Hz to give certain games a bit more room to shine. I haven't personally used it too much, but it does give the sense that Ayaneo imagined folks turning off displays more often than expected for a dual-screen clamshell. Honestly, I'm not sure how I feel about a dual-screen clamshell designed with turning off displays in mind. But I guess turning off an unused display is one way around creating a compelling use case for a second display during single-screen gameplay. It's an interesting idea, and not the last Ayaneo's packed into this device. For example, turning off the bottom display not only adds a more conventional quick settings menu and enables higher refresh rates, but it also turns the bottom display into a large trackpad. It's not the best trackpad ever, but it does allow for basic navigation and direct camera control within games, if that's your sort of thing. Alternatively, if you'd like to stick to the bottom screen only, they've included the option to fully reboot the device while sending power only to the bottom screen. Considering how oddly useful I found the bottom screen to be, that could be worth it for some folks to extend battery life while playing 4x3 systems. Again, kinda odd, but I can also see the utility. With both displays on, the bottom display focuses on launching apps and showing settings. From left to right on the screen, the dual screen option allows for turning off displays and focusing controller inputs into a single display, which is less necessary here thanks to bezels warding off unwanted touch inputs. Then there's the application window, which is an app drawer that can be sorted a few different ways depending on my needs. The task option reveals the task manager for apps open on the bottom display, and then control offers some basic quick settings options as well as volume and brightness controls. Not quite comprehensive, but still welcome and more than enough for quick reference. If that wasn't enough, pressing the Ayaneo button opens a secondary quick settings menu that displays system stats and profiles, changes button behavior and top touchscreen mapping, and offers additional settings typically found in the notification shade. I'm still not entirely sold that I need some of these stats, or that they're as accurate as the stats overlaid within the games themselves. So, I'm a huge fan of the breadth of options provided. Many complications even expand with a tap or link back to an appropriate settings page for finer detail. In terms of options to have available at the bottom screen, it's hard to think of more options that I'd frequently need. Although, I do wish they'd provided the opportunity to remove unneeded components or rearrange complications to my liking. There's also no option to treat the bottom screen as a dedicated keyboard for text entry. If I need to type on the top screen, I have to awkwardly shift my hands to accommodate. It doesn't feel great. As with other recent dual-screen handhelds, it feels like a missed opportunity at launch. Ayaneo also failed to implement proper dual-screen spanning. It's a common feature amongst almost all other dual-screen Android devices. It also makes sure apps don't need specific compatibility updates to be usable across displays. For emulation without spanning, users need to specifically use apps that support treating the bottom display or the top display as an external display and cast to it. Azar is the current best case scenario for this, since it's the best 3DS emulator and has updated to fully support external displays. By contrast, if you're looking to play games via Cemu or MelonDS, you're going to be out of luck with the main releases. Instead, you'll need to lean on Sapphire Rhodonite's forks and hope they stay up to date. If those forks stop being updated before being integrated into the main builds, update in a way that breaks Ayaneo's way of handling secondary displays, or you just want to use a random app regardless of external display support, you're gonna be out of luck. It's all especially odd on this handheld because Ayaneo baked in an easy 3-finger swipe to move apps back and forth between displays. Combined with their trackpad and host of other settings surrounding the displays, it's clear they've thought about how displays could be used together. Maybe that gives some hope they'll add spanning with a software update, but who knows? You should never buy a device on the expectation or promise of a software update. That's especially true given some other quirks I've noticed while using my Pocket DS. For starters, I've noticed some odd compatibility with external storage. It started during setup when it refused to read my Thor's microSD card without reformatting. It's continued throughout the testing process, even with USB-C adapters and a couple other cards, and feels related to the same awkwardness I've had attaching my portable SSD. I use these cards and drives to transfer files between many different Android devices, including others while testing the Pocket DS. This is the first time I've had a problem. Even worse, while connecting to my Surface Pro to transfer files manually, I've noticed that many of the high-speed cables I have on hand just don't work. Either I connect via USB 2 cables or the drive doesn't show. I did finally find a microSD card that worked without reformatting. Removing that microSD card or using QuickShare to transfer files also isn't too inconvenient. It's just kind of annoying to have any hassles at all on a platform that's usually pain-free. Lastly, it's also worth pointing out that the fans can get quite loud at max settings. It moves a lot of air. Given the fine-tuning available for GPU and CPU profiles, I'm sure some folks will find a lot of benefit in that. For me, I'm just not the biggest fan of loud Android handhelds. Fortunately, balanced and gaming power profiles aren't too bad at default settings. Under the right circumstances, they still allow the fans to be noticeable in a mostly quiet room, but it's nothing too unexpected for a device that never really gets hot to the touch. Altogether, beyond its various quirks, the Ayaneo Pocket DS is still a spectacular dual-screen Android handheld. For DS and 3DS emulation, its displays are almost ideal. Add in the solid grips and controls, and, while not perfect, it offers a remarkably solid gameplay experience for dual-screen emulation with a shockingly good single-screen experience as well. If that were all, it'd be hard not to recommend this handheld to anyone who can overlook its various quirks. Unfortunately, the no light bleed problem makes that recommendation conditional. As much as the light bleed doesn't bother my gameplay, there's no way I'd know if it'd bother yours. By Ayaneo's own sentiment, each device will be different. You might also have different use cases than me that make the problem more obvious for you. There's also the price. At $400 to $500, the Pocket DS isn't cheap. The materials, comfort, and gameplay experience feel worth that price for me, but if you're someone who doesn't have that kind of money to spend on an Android handheld, it doesn't really matter how premium it feels. At the same time, there aren't really any alternatives that feel quite as good to use. There's clearly some work that needs to be done with some of the software. Some tweaks to the D-pad and hinge position would also be appreciated, but the sum of this handheld gets so much right for dual screen emulation that getting anything else would be a discussion of acceptable compromises. For instance, comparable AYN Thor models sell for around $100 less. But alongside that lower cost, you're getting a less comfortable handheld with smaller, disproportionate displays and fewer software options. If you're mainly a fan of single-screen gaming, Retroid's $70 dual-screen add-on can be added to any handheld up to the size of a Steam Deck. And while versatile, that also means having a less integrated dual-screen experience, alongside some additional cable management. Ayaneo created a fantastic dual-screen Android handheld, possibly the best that's been created thus far. Even with its flaws and quirks, it feels incredibly good to use. It just sucks I couldn't recommend it wholeheartedly, because the price is likely out of most folks' range, and Ayaneo seemingly shot themselves in the foot at the last possible moment with display issues. Those have been my thoughts though. Now's the time when I ask for yours. Have you ordered a Pocket DS and have thoughts of your own, or are you in the market for a dual screen handheld and are considering the Pocket DS for yourself? Let me know down in the comments. As always, if you found this video helpful or informative, go ahead and give it a like to let me know, and then get subscribed for more dual screen hardware videos in the near future. If you're interested in other dual screen tech, I might recommend checking out my video on the 1X Sugar 1, somewhere up here. It's also an expensive handheld, but is similarly just a delight to use. If that's a bit much, I do also have a video showing off Retroid's dual screen add-on being useful with non-Retroid devices. I'll have a video up soon enough to compare all these devices against each other and for different use cases. But that's going to be all for this video though. Thank you so much for watching all the way until the end. Until next time, catch you later.